The red lights blazed like angry eyes across CNN's Studio 7, casting an ominous glow over what was supposed to be a civilized discussion about media ethics. Instead, the air crackled with electricity that had nothing to do with the sophisticated broadcast equipment humming around them. Fabricated nonsense. Tucker Carlson's voice cut through the studio like a blade, his face flushed crimson under the harsh studio lights. His normally perfectly styled hair showed signs of distress, with several strands falling rebelliously across his forehead. Pure, unadulterated deception. Rachel Maddow sat across from him, an island of calm in the brewing storm. Her dark-rimmed glasses caught the light as she adjusted them with deliberate precision, her fingers steady as they held a manila folder thick with documents. When she spoke, her voice carried the temperature of winter frost. Tucker, I'm simply reading from financial records. Bank transfers, to be specific. She opened the folder with theatrical slowness, the crisp sound of paper cutting through the tension. Shall I continue? The moderator, CNN's veteran anchor James Patterson, shifted uncomfortably in his chair positioned between the two combatants. His earpiece crackled with urgent whispers from the control room, but the train had already left the station. 23 years of broadcasting experience hadn't prepared him for this level of volcanic intensity. Please, let's maintain some professional, Patterson began, but Carlson's laugh interrupted him, a sound devoid of humor. Professional? Carlson leaned forward, his blue eyes blazing with indignation. She's destroying reputations with manufactured evidence, and you want professionalism? Maddow's lips curved into what might charitably be called a smile. Manufacturing? Tucker, these documents came directly from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Would you like me to read the header again? In the control room, 3 floors above the studio, executive producer Sarah Chen watched the ratings counter climb with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The numbers hadn't moved this fast since election night. Her assistant Marcus leaned over her shoulder, whispering urgently, "Should we cut to commercial?" "Are you insane?" Chen hissed back. "This is television gold." Back in the studio, Maddow had begun her methodical recitation, each word falling like a hammer blow. January 15th, wire transfer, $50,000. Origin, RT Media Holdings, Cyprus. Destination, Carlson Media Enterprises, Delaware. She paused, letting the information settle like dust after an explosion. March 3rd, $75,000, same origin. Carlson's hands clenched into fists on the sleek black desk. Where did you get these? Who provided you with these alleged documents? I think the more interesting question, Maddow replied, turning a page with deliberate care, is why you never disclosed these payments during your previous employment. The Foreign Agents Registration Act requires, don't lecture me about legal requirements. Carlson exploded, half rising from his chair. The movement was so sudden that the camera operator instinctively zoomed out, capturing both participants in the frame. You sit there with your smug superiority, reading from papers that could have been printed in someone's basement. The studio audience, a carefully selected group of journalism students and media professionals, sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the polite academic discussion they'd expected when they'd received their tickets 3 weeks ago. Several pulled out phones, despite the strict no-recording policy, unable to resist capturing history in the making. Maddow remained seated, her posture unchanged, but something flickered behind her glasses. Tucker, these documents bear the official seal of the United States Treasury. Are you suggesting federal investigators are engaged in forgery? I'm suggesting, Carlson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he settled back into his chair, that certain elements within our government have been weaponized against voices they can't control. He gestured toward her folder. That convenient collection of yours, how did it find its way to MSNBC? Through what channels? Patterson seized the momentary lull. Let's step back for a moment and no, James, let's not step back. Maddow's voice cut through his attempted moderation like a scalpel. Let's step forward. May 22nd, $127,000. Same source, same destination. She looked up from the papers, her gaze meeting Carlson's directly. That's $252,000 in the first half of the year alone. The studio's climate control system hummed quietly, but sweat beaded on Carlson's forehead. Alleged payments. Alleged sources. You're building a house of cards with conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories? Maddow's eyebrows rose above her glasses. Tucker, I specialize in following money trails. It's remarkably simple, actually. Money goes from point A to point B, and banks are required by law to document every step. She pulled out another sheet. Would you like to see the routing numbers? In his earpiece, Patterson heard Chen's voice, keep them talking. Whatever happens, keep them talking. Carlson stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. The sudden movement triggered an immediate response from the studio's security team, who shifted positions along the walls. You're destroying journalism, he declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Maddow. This isn't investigation, it's character assassination with a veneer of respectability. In practicing journalism, Maddow replied, her voice never rising above conversational level. Perhaps that's what makes you uncomfortable. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Carlson's face cycled through several expressions: anger, frustration, and something that might have been calculation. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, sharper and more focused. Journalism? He reached into his jacket pocket, producing his phone with a flourish. Let's talk about journalism, Rachel. Let's discuss standards and disclosure. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. Since we're sharing financial documents. Maddow's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. Patterson felt the atmosphere in the studio change, like the moment before lightning strikes. What are you? Maddow began. Ukrainian Energy Group, Carlson read from his phone, his voice gaining strength with each word. $200,000. Transferred to Rachel Maddow's personal account through Meridian Financial Services. He looked up from the screen, his eyes gleaming with triumph. March 15, last year. The studio fell silent except for the low hum of equipment and the distant sound of traffic 18 floors below. Maddow's hand tightened on her folder, the papers crinkling slightly under pressure. That was, she started. A consulting fee? Speaking engagement? Carlson's voice dripped with false sympathy. How convenient that your investigation into foreign media influence coincides with your own foreign financial entanglements. In the control room, Chen leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped her chair. The ratings counter had stopped climbing, it was now ascending into uncharted territory. Maddow's composure cracked visibly, her mouth opening slightly before closing again. For the first time since the broadcast began, she appeared genuinely caught off guard. The camera captured every micro-expression, every telltale sign of someone whose carefully laid plans had just been torpedoed. Patterson's voice finally broke through the charged silence. We're going to take a brief commercial break, no. Both Carlson and Maddow spoke simultaneously, their voices creating an odd harmony of opposition. No commercial break, Maddow said, recovering her voice if not her equilibrium. The viewers deserve to see this conversation through to its conclusion. Carlson nodded, a predatory smile playing across his features. Absolutely. Let's discuss transparency, Rachel. Let's talk about disclosure in foreign influence. He pocketed his phone but kept his hand near it, like a gunslinger ready to draw again. Tell us about your consulting work. Tell us about the documentary project funded by offshore accounts. The manila folder in Maddow's hands seemed suddenly less impressive, less authoritative. But her voice, when it came, carried a note of steel that hadn't been there before. This is exactly what I expected from you, Tucker. When faced with documented evidence of your own conduct, you resort to deflection and deflection? Carlson laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. I'm following your playbook, Rachel. Documents, allegations, innuendo dressed up as investigation. He gestured toward the cameras. The audience can decide who's being more transparent here. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter, the air thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained rage. In the audience, phones continued to appear despite security warnings, as if viewers sensed they were witnessing something that would be discussed for years to come. Maddow straightened in her chair, her professional mask sliding back into place like armor. Very well, Tucker. Since you want to play this game. She reached for another folder that had been sitting unopened beside her chair. The movement was subtle, but Carlson's eyes tracked it like a hawk watching prey. Whatever was in that second folder, it represented an escalation neither of them could walk back from. The red lights continued to blaze, the cameras continued to roll, and somewhere in America, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the annals of television journalism. The second folder lay before Rachel Maddow like a loaded weapon, its manila surface bearing the weight of secrets that could reshape careers and topple media empires. The studio lights seemed to pulse with anticipation as she placed her hand on its cover, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm against the cardboard. That payment, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor that had run through her moments before, was compensation for a documentary project. Fully disclosed, properly reported, and completely legal. She opened the folder with deliberate precision, revealing a stack of documents that dwarfed her previous arsenal. But since we're discussing financial transparency, Tucker, let's examine your definition of proper disclosure. Carlson's triumphant expression flickered like a candle in wind. He had played his ace, but the game was far from over. Rachel, please. Don't insult the intelligence of our viewers with convenient explanations. Convenient? Her laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Tucker, these are IRS filings. Form 1099s. There's nothing convenient about federal tax documentation. She pulled out the first sheet, holding it up to the camera with practiced showmanship. Unlike some people's creative accounting methods. In the control room, Sarah Chen felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The network executives would either crown her or crucify her for this broadcast, depending on which lawsuits arrived first. Marcus whispered in her ear, "Legal is having a stroke upstairs." "They want us to cut, tell legal to take a number," Chen hissed back, her eyes fixed on the monitors. "This is journalism history." Patterson attempted another intervention, his voice cutting through the electric tension. "Perhaps we should allow our viewers to understand the full context of these allegations." Context? Carlson's voice rose an octave, his carefully maintained television persona beginning to crack like paint under pressure. "James, the context is crystal clear. We have two journalists throwing accusations at each other based on selective document dumps and selective?" Maddow's interruption was surgical in its precision. "Would you prefer the complete financial picture, Tucker?" "Because I have it." She fanned the documents like a deck of cards. Shell companies registered in Cyprus, the Cayman Islands, and Delaware. A fascinating web of corporate entities, all leading back to a single source of funding. The studio audience sat transfixed, their earlier attempts at surreptitious recording now abandoned in favor of simply witnessing history unfold. Several had their mouths slightly open, caught between disbelief and fascination. Carlson's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. "You're describing standard business practices. Corporate structures that exist in every major media organization, including your own network." "Standard business practices don't require midnight wire transfers," Maddow replied, pulling out another document. "Or payments routed through entities that exist only on paper." She adjusted her glasses, the gesture somehow making her appear more predatory. "Shall we discuss Meridian Holdings, incorporated in Delaware with a registered address that turns out to be a mail drop?" "That's," Carlson began, but his voice caught. The color drained from his face like water from a broken vessel. "Or perhaps Baltic Media Ventures?" Maddow continued relentlessly. "Another fascinating corporate entity. Interesting how your speaking fees always seem to flow through these intermediary companies before reaching your personal accounts." Carlson recovered his composure with visible effort, straightening in his chair like a man preparing for combat. "Rachel, if we're going to discuss complex financial arrangements, let's talk about your production company's relationship with foreign documentary funding." His voice gained strength as he spoke. "Let's discuss the Meridian Financial Services connection you mentioned so casually." The shift in his tone was palpable, like the moment when a cornered animal decides to attack rather than flee. Maddow's grip on her documents tightened almost imperceptibly. That's a completely different, she started. Different? Carlson's eyes glittered with renewed confidence. Different how? Because your money came through fewer intermediaries? Because your foreign connections are more ideologically palatable? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conversational whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier shouting. Tell us about the Cyprus connection, Rachel. Tell us about the documentary that was never completed but still generated $200,000 in consulting fees. The studio fell silent except for the barely audible hum of electronic equipment and the distant rumble of Atlanta traffic. In that moment of stillness, both combatants seemed to recognize that they had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat. Maddow's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. That project was cancelled due to circumstances beyond circumstances? Carlson pounced on the word like a cat on a mouse. What circumstances, Rachel? Did your Ukrainian friends decide they didn't like the direction of your investigation? Did someone suggest that certain angles might not be beneficial to their interests? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Patterson made another attempt to regain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation. I think we should step back and examine the broader implications. The broader implications, Carlson continued, ignoring the moderator entirely, are that we have two journalists, both funded by foreign sources, both claiming the moral high ground while standing in the same swamp. He stood up again, this time moving with calculated precision rather than explosive anger. The difference is that I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. And what exactly are you, Tucker? Maddow's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity mixed with disdain. Besides a man who takes money from foreign governments while questioning other people's patriotism? The question struck home. Carlson's face flushed red, but his voice remained controlled. I'm someone who doesn't hide behind sanctimony while doing exactly what I'm accusing others of doing. Sanctimony? Maddow's eyebrows rose above her glasses. Is that what you call investigative journalism? Is that what you call following the money trail wherever it leads? I call it selective outrage, Carlson replied, beginning to pace behind his chair like a caged predator. I call it weaponizing information while conveniently omitting your own conflicts of interest. In the control room, the tension had reached breaking point. Chen watched the monitors with the fascination of someone witnessing a natural disaster. The ratings were stratospheric, but the potential legal ramifications made her stomach churn. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from network executives, all of which she was steadfastly ignoring. Tucker, Maddow said, her voice taking on a different quality, softer but somehow more dangerous. Let's talk about your family's investments. Let's discuss your wife's consulting firm and its remarkably prescient stock picks in Russian energy companies. Carlson stopped pacing. My family is off limits. Is it? Maddow tilted her head with false innocence. Because financial disclosure forms are public records. And when your spouse's investment firm shows remarkable success in predicting which Russian companies will receive favorable coverage on American television. She let the sentence hang unfinished. You're crossing a line, Carlson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Am I? Or am I simply applying the same standards of scrutiny that you've built your career on? Maddow pulled out another document. Carlson Family Trust, beneficiary of 17 separate stock transactions involving Russian energy concerns, all purchased within 48 hours of your interviews with related executives. The studio lights flickered momentarily, as if the building's electrical system was struggling to contain the voltage of the confrontation. When they steadied, both participants looked haggard under the harsh illumination. This is character assassination, Carlson said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. This is documentation, Maddow replied. This is what happens when someone who built their career on innuendo and conspiracy theories finally faces actual evidence. Carlson returned to his chair, but remained perched on its edge, ready to spring into action. Evidence? You're reading from papers that could have been fabricated in any government office building in Washington. You're building a narrative based on coincidence and timing, coincidence? Maddow's laugh was bitter. 17 stock purchases, all profitable, all timed to your coverage of the same companies. That's not coincidence, Tucker. That's a pattern. The technical crew had been working frantically to maintain broadcast quality throughout the escalating confrontation, but the electronic systems seemed to be rebelling against the human drama unfolding before them. The main audio feed began to develop a subtle static, barely noticeable but growing more pronounced with each exchange. Patterns can be manufactured, Carlson said, his voice rising to compensate for the technical difficulties. Narratives can be constructed to support predetermined conclusions. That's not journalism, Rachel. That's prosecution. And what you do is prosecution of a different sort, Maddow replied, her own voice climbing in volume. Prosecution of facts that don't fit your preferred reality. The static in the audio feed suddenly intensified, reducing Maddow's words to an unintelligible buzz. She continued speaking, her lips moving silently while her voice disappeared into electronic chaos. The effect was eerily prophetic, as if the technology itself was commenting on the state of public discourse. Carlson, still audible through his microphone, seized the opportunity. And there you have it, folks. The voice of liberal media, silenced by their own technology. Perhaps even the equipment recognizes propaganda when it hears it. In the control room, technicians scrambled to restore the audio feed. Chen barked orders while Marcus worked frantically at the mixing board. The irony was not lost on anyone present that a discussion about media manipulation was being interrupted by an actual technical manipulation, albeit an unintentional one. After 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, Maddow's voice crackled back to life mid-sentence. Documented evidence of coordination between your editorial decisions and your family's financial interests. The restoration of her audio created a moment of perfect dramatic timing, as if the technical difficulties had been orchestrated by a master director. The impact was immediate and devastating, her words cutting through the studio air like a blade. Carlson's momentary triumph evaporated, replaced by something approaching desperation. Coordination? You're describing standard investment practices. You're criminalizing success. I'm describing conflicts of interest that should have been disclosed, Maddow replied, her composure fully restored. I'm describing the kind of ethical violations that would end careers in legitimate journalism. The battle lines were now fully drawn, and both combatants stood ready for the final assault that would determine not just the outcome of this broadcast, but the future of their respective careers. The studio hummed with anticipation, the cameras rolled, and somewhere in America, millions of viewers held their breath. The studio had become a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion, the air thick with unspoken threats and barely contained rage. Rachel Maddow reached into her second folder with the precision of a surgeon selecting the perfect scalpel, her fingers closing around a single sheet of paper that seemed to carry the weight of destiny. Tucker, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like ice through silk, I want to play something for our viewers. Carlson's face, already flushed from their previous exchanges, took on an ashen quality. Play what, exactly? A recording. Maddow produced a small digital device from her folder, its silver surface gleaming under the studio lights. Audio from a phone conversation you had 3 weeks ago with someone identifying himself as Viktor Petrov, representing what he called mutual interests. The studio fell silent except for the mechanical hum of cameras and the distant rumble of Atlanta traffic 18 floors below. In the control room, Sarah Chen felt her mouth go dry as she watched Carlson's reaction through the monitors. That's impossible, Carlson said, but his voice carried the hollow ring of someone trying to convince himself as much as his audience. You can't possibly have legal recording, Maddow interrupted smoothly, made by a journalist conducting an investigation into foreign influence in American media. She held up the device like a communion wafer. Shall we listen? Patterson made one final attempt to maintain some semblance of control. Rachel, I think we should discuss the legal implications of the legal implications, Maddow said without taking her eyes off Carlson, are that this recording was made in accordance with federal wiretapping laws by a journalist acting in the public interest. She pressed a button on the device. Static filled the studio for a moment, followed by the unmistakable sound of a phone connection. Then came Carlson's voice, tinny but clearly recognizable. Victor, I appreciate the continued partnership. The numbers we discussed are acceptable. A heavily accented voice responded, excellent, Tucker. The monthly arrangements will continue as before. Your coverage of the energy sector has been most beneficial to our objectives. Carlson's laugh crackled through the speakers. Well, it's business, right? You pay well, and I deliver what my audience wants to hear anyway. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving the studio in deafening silence. Carlson sat frozen in his chair, his face cycling through expressions of shock, denial, and calculation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. That's taken completely out of context. Context? Maddow's eyebrows rose above her glasses. What context makes accepting monthly payments from foreign operatives acceptable for an American journalist? Foreign operatives? Carlson's voice gained strength, desperation fueling his comeback. You're dramatizing a simple business arrangement with international media consultants. Monthly payments, Tucker. Monthly. Maddow pulled out another document. Bank records showing regular transfers of $15,000 every 30 days, for 8 months. She looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what foreign influence looks like in practice. Carlson stood abruptly, his chair spinning backward on its wheels. You have no right to secretly record private conversations. This is illegal surveillance disguised as journalism. Actually, came a new voice from the studio entrance, it's perfectly legal. All heads turned to see a woman in a charcoal gray suit walking purposefully toward the set. Behind her, 2 men in similar attire flanked the entrance, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room. Who the hell are you? Carlson demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The woman produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal official identification. Special Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI. Financial Crimes Division. She looked between Carlson and Maddow with professional detachment. We've been monitoring this broadcast with great interest. Patterson's voice came out as a squeak. Monitoring? Mr. Carlson, Agent Martinez continued, ignoring the moderator, you are under investigation for violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act and conspiracy to defraud the United States. She paused, her gaze shifting to Maddow. MS. Maddow, you are also under investigation for similar charges. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Maddow's composed facade cracked for the first time, her face registering genuine shock. I beg your pardon? The recording you just played, Martinez explained with clinical precision, was part of an ongoing federal investigation. Both of you have been under surveillance for the past 6 months. She gestured to her colleagues, who began moving closer to the set. The irony of this broadcast is that you've been accusing each other of crimes while both participating in the same illegal activities. Carlson found his voice first. This is outrageous. I demand to speak with my attorney. That's your right, Martinez replied calmly, producing a set of handcuffs from her jacket. But first, both of you need to come with us. Wait, Maddow said, her journalistic instincts overriding her shock. Are you saying that our entire confrontation tonight was orchestrated? That you wanted us to expose each other? Martinez allowed herself the hint of a smile. Let's just say that your mutual animosity made our job considerably easier. When people are angry, they tend to reveal more than they intend. The studio erupted in controlled chaos. Camera operators continued filming despite shouted orders from the control room to cut the feed. The live audience sat transfixed, many recording on their phones despite security protocols. This was no longer a debate about media ethics, it had become the biggest story of the year, unfolding in real time. This is entrapment. Carlson shouted, backing away from the approaching agents. You can't use our own broadcast against us. Actually, we can, Martinez replied. Everything you've said tonight has been broadcast live to millions of viewers. It's all public record now. She gestured to Maddow, who remained seated, staring at the digital recorder in her hands as if it had transformed into a venomous snake. The Ukrainian payments, Maddow said slowly, you knew about those. We knew about everything, Martinez confirmed. Your documentary funding, Tucker's consulting fees, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. Both of you thought you were investigating each other, but you were really just confirming our evidence. Patterson, finally finding his voice, attempted to restore some semblance of journalistic order. Agent Martinez, can you explain to our viewers how this investigation, the investigation is ongoing? Martinez cut him off. What I can tell you is that foreign influence in American media is a serious threat to national security. When journalists become paid advocates for foreign governments while presenting themselves as independent voices, they undermine the very foundations of democratic discourse. Carlson made one last desperate play. This is a setup. Deep state operatives targeting conservative voices. You're proving everything I've said about government overreach. Mr. Carlson, Martinez said with infinite patience, we have recordings of you discussing editorial decisions with foreign handlers. We have bank records showing payments tied directly to your coverage decisions. This isn't about conservative or liberal, this is about American journalists being bought and paid for by foreign governments. Maddow slowly stood, her movements careful and deliberate. The recording I played, you provided that, didn't you? We provided the opportunity, Martinez clarified. The content was entirely authentic. Mr. Carlson really did have those conversations. You really did receive those payments. The only thing we orchestrated was bringing you together in a setting where the truth would emerge. The handcuffs appeared with practiced efficiency. Carlson struggled briefly, more from wounded pride than any real hope of escape. This is political persecution. You're criminalizing legitimate business relationships. We're enforcing federal law, Martinez replied, securing the cuffs with professional detachment. When American citizens fail to register as foreign agents while taking money to influence public opinion, that's a felony. Maddow submitted to the arrest with more dignity, but her voice carried a note of betrayal. I was investigating foreign influence. I was trying to expose the truth. While participating in the same system you claim to be exposing, Martinez observed. The irony is remarkable, really. Both of you built careers on accusations of corruption while being corrupted yourselves. The studio lights continued to blaze as the two former adversaries were led away in matching handcuffs, their mutual destruction complete. Patterson sat alone at the moderator's desk, staring into the cameras with the shell-shocked expression of someone who had witnessed civilization collapse in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, he said finally, his voice barely steady, we appear to be experiencing technical difficulties. We'll return after these messages. But the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment as the biggest names in cable news journalism shuffled toward the studio exit in federal custody. In the control room, Chen stared at her monitors in stunned silence, knowing that she had just overseen the end of an era. The red lights continued to blaze like angry eyes, bearing witness to the spectacular collapse of two media empires and the exposure of a corruption so deep that it had infected the very people trusted to report the truth. America watched in fascination and horror as its most prominent voices were revealed as something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. The reckoning hour had arrived, and justice wore a badge.